I'm so proud of you. Look at you getting social and everything. It's right. I get so anxious. I'm like, faster. Did everybody see my shirt?
No, you're sitting with it hidden.
No, I know the camera can't see it, but I wore it from the camera. That can't see it. You guys ready?
Hello everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Elephants in the Room. Today we're going to look at America's first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, a man given that title as a result of the character of his life, a man who could be trusted to dispense justice, diplomacy, and grace because he knew ultimate truth found only in the Bible, and because he had proven himself trustworthy of American confidence everywhere. Come with us now as we take a look at a powerful, intelligent, caring Christian man who once said, "We must go home to be happy, and our home is not in this world. Here we have nothing but to do our duty." Well, let's do a quick biography of John Jay first. So we know that he was born in 1745 in Rye, New York, I believe. He came from a merchant's family. He got into the law at a young age. He went to King's College, which is now Columbia University. And so he kind of got into politics as a result of his career in the law.
And then he went on to do many great things, being a diplomat, a negotiator, a governor of New York as well, and just a wonderful man who is considered a founding father, although he actually didn't sign the Declaration of Independence. He was very initially wary, as many people were, of going to war and wanted to try to find a resolution with Britain before going to the step of war. But once things became more entangled and it became clear that that was going to be the option, he quickly became fully on board for a revolution. So.
And he's such an interesting guy because he held so many different jobs and he filled so many different roles throughout the Revolution and into the founding of America. And I think this kind of sets him apart in a way from other founding fathers, just because he served in so many different capacities. So one of those was the Secretary of Foreign Affairs for a while. So he went abroad to advocate for America's independence abroad. So, and then he was, like we mentioned, he was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was placed there by Washington. He was thought of very highly by the rest of the founding fathers, and this seems kind of unique in that day. There was a lot of backbiting and competing between the founding fathers and varying points of view, and they all had good things to say about Jay. As someone who was very honorable and trustworthy and just very reasonable and humble. So I think in a way that's one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of information on him. He was very, very humble in the fact that he was more concerned with America in the long term than he was about his own name or his own legacy.
Yeah, and I think John Adams was the one who said he should be considered more highly than the rest of us because he didn't seem to engage in quite the same things that they were.
And at 33, he was president of the Continental Congress, so that was his contribution to the Revolutionary War. And I was reading that during that time, many young lawyers and politicians were called up into the ranks of this new government, and he was one of those. So although we needed many people to actually go and fight, he took on this important government role, and then, as we said, that experience helped him launch into all these other things that helped to shape our nation.
Yeah, and I think another part of what he did during the Revolution was he was heading up a network of informants. So he was actually given the title of America's first national level counterintelligence chief too, and the CIA credits him as well as being one of the first kind of spy people, which is pretty cool.
That is cool, and going back to what I said about the wide range of things that he kind of had his hands in at the beginning. So not only the judicial system with being the first Chief Justice, but roots in the CIA. It's just really cool what his influence in that early time.
Kind of runs the whole gamut of
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
nowadays, if you think somebody was in the CIA and they were on the Supreme Court and they were a governor, that's
And foreign
probably
affairs.
unlikely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we commented that last week too, didn't we, with John Witherspoon, that they seem to just to have so many different talents and interests, and their understanding was so much more complete. It seems like that they could be in so many different things.
Arenas,
Yeah.
well, as a fledgling nation, there was such a need too. So
Yeah.
anyone that was willing and able to take on these roles was welcomed to do so
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting, Lita, you were saying that he was influential in the National Archives.
Yeah.
What did you read about that?
So they actually credit him with being kind of the front runner of the National Archives, because during the founding of America, he saw a need to start compiling these documentations. So I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but he was one of the 3 writers for the Federalist Papers, which was hugely influential in the Constitution, getting that up and running. And so as you can see, he was very passionate about paperwork and documentation, and making sure that there was a history and a record of everything going on at that time and how it shaped the minds of the people of America.
Yeah. Well, that's so ironic that he was passionate about that, considering there's so little documentation on him compared to the other founding fathers, which is sad.
Yeah.
But what is it about him that makes him so important, but also kind of forgettable?
I think one of the quotes that I read, it said something to the effect that he lived a very quiet life. So, you have, Benjamin Franklin, who was known as a humorist, and he did a lot to like poke fun and be that satirist. And then you've got Hamilton, who is very like intemperate and kind of like, in your face. But then you've got John Jay, who is very willing to sit in the background and have a quiet influence. So he lives a quiet life. He doesn't, fight with people just for the sake of fighting it. He's not looking for a name for himself. And so I think in that way, he's very honorable. And the other founding fathers recognized that, but at the same time, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So because he wasn't a person who just tried to speak for the sake of speaking, he's kind of forgotten because of that.
Those are biblical principles as well. He's kind
Yeah.
of minding his own business, living in peace with himself and God, and just doing his duty, as the quote in the beginning said, right? Like, this is like what he felt was needed to be done at that time, and he did it, and he didn't need a bunch of
Recognition,
attention for doing it.
That is something that seems to be lost in today's
Politics, for
political
sure.
sphere.
Yeah. But I also thought it was interesting, we were saying before, that he was appointed as the first Supreme Court Justice, or Chief Justice, I guess, and then there was like 5 others with him at that time, so the court was only 6 when it started, and they were all appointed by George Washington, and the others were actually kind of underneath him, I believe. So he was the Chief Justice, yeah. So it's just interesting because he actually stepped down from that role after about 6 years. Nowadays, if you get to the Supreme Court, you stay until you pass, and it's very rare that you would step down. But he actually stepped down to take on the role of governor of New York, when he was only the 2nd governor of New York. And in my reading, I read that he actually didn't really want to do that, but I think he felt that was also his duty because he was from New York. And so when that role maybe presented itself, he took advantage of it and wanted to do that duty as well. And back then, I think a lot more people were more loyal to their states than actually to the government, even though he was a Federalist and wrote 5 of the Federalist papers in the article. But he, I think, probably felt some sort of loyalty to New York to go back and do that.
Yeah, there's such value in what you were saying with the word duty, and I think that is so lost in today's politicians. It's making a name for themselves, it's power, it's making laws, it's influence,
Your
and
agenda.
Yeah, and then definitely agendas. And I think John Jay is such a good example of doing your duty, getting the job done, and sacrificing for yourself. And you said like he didn't really want to do the governor job, but it was a duty. It was an honor to do that, and I think that's something that we could learn from today.
Yeah, because he was still, he didn't pass until 1829, and he resigned to go do that governor job in, I think it was quite a bit before then, still in the 1700s actually. So he could have remained on that Supreme Court for many more years, but he actually ended up retiring in 1801 and going back to New York to live quietly in his family's estate. And then they, the only time that he really popped back up was in 1819 when he was actually condemning the move for Missouri to become a state because they were a slaveholding state, and he believed that we shouldn't be allowing any more slaveholding states to be joining the Union. He did, one of the last things that he did before he retired from government was he stopped being a slaveholder in 1798 and had been against it before that as well. And then in 1799, I think he did legislation against it as well in New York. So that was one of the last things that he did before he went and retired. And then when he came back out in 1819, and then he passed 10 years later. And he's still there, buried in Rye as well.
And I think, I don't think we've talked about this yet either, but he was so instrumental in the negotiations with Britain after the war. Yeah. And it's due to him that we have some of the boundaries even that we have. And even John Adams said, he deserves way more credit than he's getting for his part that he played in the negotiations with Britain.
So one of the most interesting quotes that I found, he said, "Real Christians will abstain from violating the rights of others, and therefore will not provoke war. Almost all nations have peace or war at the will and pleasure of rulers whom they do not elect, and who are not always wise or virtuous. Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty, as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation, to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." And I think that's such a powerful quote because there's such a movement against Christianity today. Like, it's so outdated, or it's so hateful, or it's so bigoted and awful. But I think the reality is, he said it, and I think it's true. I think we should prefer Christian leaders because the Bible as our anchor and the love of God in us will prevent us from wanting to hurt other people, will prevent us from wanting to provoke other people, and to have leaders with that kind of understanding is really, I think, a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think it's important that people be rooted in morals before they try to go and lead others, right? So our leadership needs to have a moral compass, and the best moral compass is the Bible, God's Word, and the 10 Commandments on all of that. And so clearly those things were written on his heart, just based on his actions and his contribution through society. And then for him to relay that as well, I think is very wise of him, and it's a shame that more people don't see it that way nowadays. But what a great reminder he is, and his words are, that we should be rooted in our Christian faith.
Yeah, and I love that he sort of points out the difference of America and other countries. Here we have the ability to choose who our leaders are, and most of the world doesn't have that. So, I mean, to me, of course, if we have the ability, we should be electing Christian people.
Something that really resonated to me when you read that was real Christians. And I feel like I just have to chuckle at that because that's something that we've kind of been tossing around, the three of us too, nowadays, right? There's Christians and then there's real Christians. And so it was kind of funny to me that, like, even back then, he's differentiating between a true Christian and someone that claims the title, or is just a nominal Christian, because there are many people that if you ask them what they believe or what their faith is, they would say Christian, but maybe they've never even been inside a church, but they just call themselves that because they live in America or their parents were, or whatever the case may be. So I thought that was very interesting, but it goes to show how throughout time and history, there's nothing new under the sun, and human nature doesn't change. And what he said back then is just as true as it is now, and just as applicable to our culture as it was to the culture of that time. So I really thought that was a a unique connection
Yeah.
point with, it's kind of like a wink that you get from these founders that like, hey, we understand, we're living the same life that you guys are, and we get it,
Yeah.
It was pretty cool when you read that.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Elephants in the Room. Thank you so much for joining us today as we explore John Jay, a statesman, an American patriot, a negotiator, a politician, lawyer, and definitely a founding father, a governor, and a chief justice of our wonderful United States. Such a wonderful man, and so great to be reminded of biblical truths of leadership and the value of American society and culture. We have been enjoying this series. We will continue with our Founding Fathers series next time, so be sure to like and subscribe to our channel below.